Welcome to Crossroads. There's a federal all-hands-on-deck, entire government operation. It's a probe into the fraud that's happening in Minnesota. And this could actually extend into an official Department of Justice probe into Governor Tim Walz, and probably others too. Now, this is not limited to just Minnesota, by the way. Similar forms of welfare fraud are now being found all across the United States. A lot of it through migrant groups and so on. President Donald Trump recently alleged that the situation in California could be worse than Minnesota. The reports coming out now, they're saying it's possible that 10% of taxpayer dollars has been stolen through fraud. I mean, we'll see where it goes, but this is getting massive. And meanwhile, also, the United States could oversee a regime change in Venezuela. And in the meantime, the reports that gangs are going around and terrorizing people who support Americans in the country. Now look, first, before we get started, I also released a special report yesterday on what's really going on in Venezuela, the subversive history behind it all, and how everything converged in what happened with the capture of Maduro over the weekend. Now, like, was it about regime change? Was it about oil or resources? Was it really about drugs and stopping the cartel? Well, it's actually all of those to an extent, but there's a lot more to it. And in this episode, I go in depth into exactly what's going on. I show you the history. This is a necessary viewing if you want to understand what really happened in Venezuela, why it matters. This video is very important. I go in depth into it. The special feature is called The Venezuela Operation, Why the Maduro Raid is Only the Beginning. And let me show you a trailer of that before we get started on today's episode. There's a lot more happening in Venezuela than meets the eye. Now, the country's leader until recently, Nicolas Maduro, he was captured, flown to the United States in a daring special operations raid. The United States is going to be briefly overseeing the transition of government in Venezuela. American warships, they were moved nearby to the Caribbean, and President Trump is now suggesting similar actions could be used against other countries tied in with the drug trade. But it's fair to ask, what's actually going on? Is this about regime change? Is this about oil or resources? Is it about drugs and stopping the cartels? Well, it's actually all of those, but there's a lot more to it. What we're watching take place on the surface in Venezuela is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, that is currently already out. If you want to watch it, you can go to Epoch TV. That's EPOCHTV.com. The link is going to be in the live chat and the description below. Make sure to check it out. If you're already a subscriber or watching Epoch TV, like, you can just watch it whenever you want. So this is a very important episode. And again, I show you history that nobody's talking about. I show you context nobody's talking about. And I do believe that if people see this special feature we just did, it'll make a lot more sense what's really happening with Venezuela, why it matters for the entire Latin American region, and even in terms of like global politics. This is a very big deal. It's not about oil. It's not really about drugs, I'd even say. This is something much, much bigger. And the implications could also be very large. Make sure to check it out. And now into today's stories. Now, first of all, the White House is taking something very serious. They've called an all-hands-on-deck entire government effort probe into the fraud now happening in Minnesota, or being uncovered. And this could actually extend into an official DOJ probe into Governor Tim Walz. He's the former running mate of Kamala Harris during the 2024 election. And he also announced that he would not run for a third term as governor. He's now under investigation under the widespread fraud being exposed in his state. He's being tied in with it. And this is White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt speaking about this on Fox News' Jesse Waters. Watch.
The scale of the fraud that the Trump administration, with the help of great independent journalists like Nick Shirley, is uncovering right now is surely shocking. But President Trump has been calling out Tim Walz for his incompetence and corrupt leadership for a very long time. And Trump was right about everything. This is another example of that, which is why Governor Walz is dropping out of the race for re-election today. This is a man who can no longer even win the support of the voters within his home state because his policies have failed them. And now the great people of Minnesota, a state that was once known as the land of 10,000 lakes, has been turned into the land of 10,000 Somali schemes because of their governor. And don't forget, this is a guy who was at the top of the Democrat Party's ticket, the number 2. He was Kamala Harris's running mate just about a year ago until President Trump crushed them last November. And it was in large part because the president was calling out this fraud. And so this has been a day one priority for the Trump administration, Jesse. The Department of Justice has convicted and prosecuted nearly 100 defendants in Minnesota. And because of these new details and this new reporting that has come to light, this is a all hands on deck across the entire government effort. We are surging resources. You saw today the Department of Homeland Security announced we have nearly 2,000 agents from the Homeland Security Investigations Team. The FBI is on the ground, and we're freezing money. HHS cut off funding for child care centers and for daycares. USDA Secretary Rollins has been asking Governor Walz to see the recipients of SNAP in his state. So this is all hands on deck. Rest assured, it's a top priority for President Trump. And he believes that Governor Walz is criminally liable. And I think the Department of Justice is going to find out.
Now that's pretty significant, right? Trump believes that Governor Walz is criminally liable, as she says, and also saying the DOJ will find out. Now, we don't know if this is an official investigation. She hints DOJ will find out. They haven't really announced anything official yet. Based on her statements, it sounds like they are, but again, we don't fully know right now. What we can say, though, is that, well, Governor Tim Walz dropped out of running for a third term as governor of Minnesota. He said in a statement that a single taxpayer dollar wasted on fraud is a dollar too much to tolerate. He's been saying that when fraud is found in his state, they arrest the people committing it. And he's saying, you can't go after an entire ethnic group based on the actions of a few individuals. So that's kind of his position on it. He also said that while there's a role to play for everyone, from the legislature to prosecutors to insurance companies to local and county governments, the buck stops with me, the governor. And he said, my administration is taking fast, decisive action to solve this crisis. He said, we will win the fight against the fraudsters. But he adds as well, the political gamemanship we're seeing from Republicans is only making that fight harder to win. And he said as well, further in, I came to the conclusion that I can't give a political campaign my all. Every minute I spend defending my own political interests would be a minute I can't spend defending the people of Minnesota against the criminals who prey on our generosity and these cynics who prey on our differences. So he's saying basically there's so much going on in his state that he doesn't have the ability to dedicate time to a proper political campaign. He needs to act as governor, deal with the crisis taking place, both on the dealing with fraudsters front and on trying to push back against all the political attacks and personal attacks on him. Now, is that the case? Is it something else? You tell me. But what we can say is this. The investigations, while alleged by, again, the White House, actually come from other sides as well. There's also Congress investigating. This was December 22nd. And the House Oversight Committee said, today, House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform Chairman James Comer is expanding the committee's investigation into massive fraud and money laundering in Minnesota's social services programs under Governor Tim Walz's and Attorney General Keith Ellison's watch. The state efforts to cover it up, which it turns out they were, based on whistleblower claims, there actually were attempts to cover it up, including punishing whistleblowers, including blocking investigations. And it says, and retaliation against whistleblowers who sought to protect taxpayer dollars. And they said this, quote, whistleblowers have made it clear that American taxpayers were defrauded in Minnesota, raising serious questions about whether Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Ellison failed to act or was complicit in the theft. It adds that the House Oversight Committee is aggressively investigating widespread fraud in Minnesota's Social Security programs and the failures of Governor Walz's administration that allowed taxpayer funds to be funneled to terrorist networks responsible for the deaths of Americans. I believe he's talking about Al-Shabaab here, which is a Somali terrorist organization. And these Somalis were laundering money out of the United States and donating it to terrorism. Turns out as well that even foreign government officials, including with the United Nations, who are Somalis, might have also been involved with this, it's getting wild. But the ad's here, quote, "Today, the committee is requesting information about the Treasury Department, the Department of Justice, as well as transcribed interviews with Minnesota state officials. While Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison turn a blind eye to taxpayer fraud, the House Oversight Committee is acting decisively and will use its full power to protect hardworking taxpayers," said Chairman Comer. And then he goes on to add effectively how they're going to be doing this. They're going to be calling government officials to testify. Local officials in Minnesota will be called before Congress to testify. Whistleblowers will be called before Congress to testify. And the great thing about congressional hearings is we get to watch them. Typically, when the DOJ is investigating things, we don't get to see it often. Sometimes you do, but oftentimes you don't. Under normal legal protections, normally you don't see that till the case is actually filed. When the House is investigating it, we get to watch the entire testimonies. So this is going to make the entire issue a national, but probably even international spectacle. We will get to hear from all the whistleblowers. We'll get to watch government officials in Minnesota get called in forced to testify. We will, in other words, get to see the context, the claims, and all the evidence being presented. And this is going to make what we're watching now the beginning, not the end of this. Get ready. This is just the beginning. Now, look, on that point, what have I been saying? I've been saying that Minnesota is the tip of the iceberg. I've been saying that this is a nationwide problem. What you're watching in Minnesota is happening in every single state of the United States. This is happening at least in some local cities. And why do I know this? It's because I know that there are migrant groups and been getting a lot of American taxpayer benefits, welfare. A lot of them just openly defraud the Medicaid systems. A lot of them openly defraud free housing programs, like everything. I know this because it's been known for years. Going back a decade, we knew about this. In fact, in New York and New Jersey, there are entire systems set up in place that allow migrants, illegal aliens, to steal Social Security numbers and then literally one-stop shop register for all kinds of social welfare programs. This has been happening openly in many states, and nothing is done about it. The question you're going to have now is, why was nothing done about it? Was it oversight? Was it just, hey, we didn't have time to investigate it? Or was this permitted or even facilitated fraud? Was this something that maybe local police were being blocked from investigating? Was this something that if whistleblowers came forward and warned about, that they were punished? This is going to be a nationwide scandal as the lid comes off this. This is going to be a nationwide scandal that not only implicates and even justifies deportation of illegal aliens, which is something the Trump administration politically wants right now. This could also be something that incriminates local officials who have really enforced sanctuary city policies. Because what this does by extension is makes officials who are blocking deportation of criminals, blocking investigation of criminals, complicit in the fraud and crime that was being committed. That's why this matters so much. And guess what? Well, as I said, similar forms of welfare fraud are now being found across the country. And President Donald Trump recently alleged it's actually even worse in California. It's worse there. Minnesota is not even the worst place with this. Trump said this on Truth Social. He said, California under Governor Gavin Newsom is more corrupt than Minnesota, if that's possible. He said the fraud investigation of California has begun. He said, thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So we don't know what they found. We don't know what makes Donald Trump come out and say this, but he did say this. The fraud investigation of California has begun. Get ready for some wild times, because guess what? It's political season in America. Midterms are coming up, and things tend to get wild in this country when we're rallying up for political season. And look, aside from that, this could be a big deal. As I mentioned before, the big thing about what's happening in Minnesota is that fraud like this is widespread. And if local officials are getting pulled in with the whole investigations, this could be a trend we see all across the United States. This could be what Republicans want to have to effectively incriminate everybody who's been enforcing sanctuary city laws. This basically makes sanctuary city laws into a type of RICO. That's why this matters so much. This is going to be huge. At the very least, even if they don't bring criminal charges, this will become a political narrative that will destroy the reputation and maybe the political careers of a lot of people. And look, on that point also, as the investigations into fraud spread, well, there are some attempts to block them, as you might expect. And the accusation on the other side is this. Well, these fraud investigations are targeting people based on race a lot of times. When people are going to Minnesota and saying, well, gee, let's go find some fraud, what are they doing? They're literally looking up every Somali-run business, effectively, and they're knocking on their doors, and some are kind of harassing them. Just because you find fraud with one group doesn't mean that every single person of an entire race of people is committing fraud like that, right? It's pretty widespread, but it doesn't mean everybody's involved. But guess what? This is now happening in Washington State. Seattle Red said this: Washington Democrats are advancing a bill critics note would make it harder for the public to scrutinize daycare providers at the exact moment serious fraud concerns are coming into focus nationwide. This is Senate Bill 5926, sponsored by State Senator Lisa Wellman, a Democrat from Mercer Island. It says it expands public records exemptions for child care providers, shielding a wide range of personal information from disclosure. It notes the bill extends privacy protections beyond in-home daycare operations to all licensed or certified child care providers in Washington, including large centers that receive substantial taxpayer funding. It notes, as I've been noting, opponents say the timing is suspect, particularly as investigators and independent journalists uncover alleged large-scale fraud in the daycare sector elsewhere. And this is a big deal, by the way. Now, on the point of what's being found in Minnesota, a lot of the discussion on this was actually sparked by independent investigators. It was random, independent journalists and literal YouTubers going and knocking on doors, and the videos, because they did find what looked like massive fraud, spurred the federal government to do something about it. Remember, the initial narrative with what's happening in Minnesota was not about daycare fraud. The initial claims of fraud were around people stealing COVID money. It was COVID kickbacks and stuff like that. It was them seizing money and stealing money for Medicaid. It turned out that what was viewed as a massive amount of fraud, at least $1 billion in fraud, is now estimated to be in the areas of $15 billion or even more. A huge, ridiculous, insane amount of money being stolen literally just in one state. And what is happening now is that independent investigators, journalists, the good old auditors of the American people are boots on the ground looking into this, and there are local officials saying, uh-oh, we better not allow them to do this. Uh-oh, this could actually lead to the, literal harassment of some innocent people. But the question we have as a country is, well, is it right to block investigations, even if some of those investigations do look into things that don't need to be investigated? Effectively, what's being carried out is a local level audit. A local level audit by the mouthpieces and watchdogs of the American people, which is good old-fashioned investigative journalists. And the reality is, too, is that when you get a whole bunch of people who are maybe less experienced in some ways, you're going to have some people being kind of mean to each other and harassing people. The big question is the gain worth the loss, basically? And also, is it right for a local official to try to block investigations, especially at a time when massive fraud is in fact being uncovered? And in the face of them blocking investigations, is there going to be an audit at the local level? Is there going to be an audit at the state level? What about the federal level? You can't block all investigations. And so this is where it's going to get interesting. Now, on another topic, though, after the capture of Maduro in Venezuela, his free weekend trip to New York City, Donald Trump is suggesting possible strikes on cartels in Mexico, And the Mexican president is now downplaying those claims. Trump doesn't really mean what he's saying. We'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. After the capture of Maduro in Venezuela, Donald Trump is now suggesting, well, get ready, other things like this could happen elsewhere, including maybe even in Mexico, where the cartels are, he says, running the country. And the president of Mexico is now coming out and downplaying Trump's claims. Bloomberg said this: President Claudia Sheinbaum downplayed Donald Trump's threat to invade Mexico and reiterated her rejection of a U.S. military presence in her country. She said, quote, "I don't believe in an invasion. I don't think it's something they take seriously," Sheinbaum said Monday in her first press conference since U.S. forces snatched Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in the early hours of Saturday. It notes that Sheinbaum said that in her many phone calls, Trump has repeatedly insisted that the U.S. military be allowed to enter Mexico and that she has always rejected the idea. Well, we can't let you capture the people destabilizing our country and criminalizing the entire state and, killing our people because it's not nice. It says, however, she stressed her willingness to cooperate in combating drug trafficking into the United States. In other words, catch me if you can, gringo, as they try to smuggle drugs across the U.S. It notes that Sheinbaum said she spoke with the president of Spain and Colombia about the Venezuela crisis, but said she doesn't have plans to talk with Trump for now. So the big question is, does Trump actually mean what he says? That's a good question. How many times has Donald Trump said he would do something and then did it? How many times has Donald Trump said that he would do something and did not do it? Well, you tell me. If Donald Trump is saying, hey, we're going to go bomb the cartels, get ready for it, will he do it? Well, we will soon find out. Mexico is going to be the next big target for this. You also have things spreading in other countries. It looks like right now Cuba is already experiencing the downfall I said would happen yesterday. What is happening in Cuba? Rapid economic decline. As I said in yesterday's episode, Cuba is just incredibly dependent on Venezuela. They were the lifeline extended to them post-Soviet Union collapse. Without Venezuela, Cuba does not survive as a communist regime. You're going to watch regime change in Cuba. America could sit back and, eat like microwave dinners and watch it on television, which we like to do. And there's nothing that is going to stop the collapse of Cuba effectively, as long as no other country intervenes. Cuba is now in a death spiral. Iran is also now in a death spiral. And it's possible we could see this spread maybe to other regimes as well. We will have to wait and see. And look, on that point also, the United States could soon oversee a regime change in Venezuela. This is going to be important for a few different reasons. Basically, the entire world is watching right now. Whatever happens in Venezuela is going to be the litmus test of whether America is acting responsibly or irresponsibly. Did we go in there and kidnap the leader, literally? We did. Did we go in there and kidnap their leader, only to throw them into flames and chaos, or would he go there and kidnap their leader to oversee a peaceful transition of government that will in long term benefit their people? Well, we're now seeing kind of the bad side of it. There are now reports that gangs are going around and they are terrorizing people in Venezuela who support the United States. The Telegraph said this: a Caracas highway is choked with cars, but far from typical rush hour traffic. It says Avenida Boyance, a highway running alongside El Avila National Park in Venezuela's capital, has ground to a halt because masked men holding Kalashnikovs, AK-47 type rifles, are stopping drivers and demanding to search their phones and cars. Have you been posting on the internet, compadre, about your support for America? It says this: the gangs of armed men, part of pro-Maduro militias known as collectivos, scoured vehicles at hastily erected checkpoints following a government directive to root out Venezuelans in support of the U.S.'s brazen capture of Nicolas Maduro. Now, this needs more context. When it talks about the gangs and biker gangs and these things, like in a lot of the media, they're just framing it as pro-Maduro gangs going around and harassing people. The reality is this: these gangs, the collectivos as they call them, these are actually part of the Maduro regime. These were his thugs. After Maduro lost the election in 2018, and there were mass protests because he said he just wasn't going to leave government, and he literally stole the election, acknowledged both by Trump and Biden. Even the Biden administration acknowledged that Maduro stole the election. This was a bipartisan issue. The Biden administration put a $25 million price on Maduro's head. They put a $25 million bounty on Maduro. This was not Democrats, this was not Republicans, this was bipartisan, and the media is lying to you about the current context of it now. The reality that happened in Venezuela 2018-2019 was this: Maduro lost the election. He then said, well, I'm going to stay in government anyway. He then got the collectivos, these gangs, to go around and just wreck every single person who challenged him. There were mass protests. They were kicking in doors. They were shooting people point blank. They were dragging people out of their homes. The media, the dishonest, lying media, told you these were just gangs. They're not. They're militias that work for Maduro. They are militias that work for Maduro. Some of it was even FARC. And these gangs, they work with his cartel, the Cartel of the Suns, which Maduro was the leader of. These gangs are now doing the exact same thing. They are the thugs of a communist state. I know you say, well, they're socialists. No, they're motivated by communist ideology. These are communists. And they're basically doing the same thing every communist regime has done. You have the state and the state powers, and then you have the extra legal state powers, which are gangs. The Chinese Communist Party had the Little Red Guard. The Nazis and fascists had the black shirts and the brown shirts. The Soviets, as part of the Comintern, had Antifa, anti-fascist action, leading up to the, again, campaigns throughout Germany ahead of Hitler, actually. It's the exact same thing. Every communist regime has its gangs of thugs because they can use them for murders, they can use them to control the drug trades, they can use them to control the criminal underworld, and they can make sure they control both the surface and underworld economies. They can do things, murder their enemies, assassinate their political rivals, go and punish dissidents, and it doesn't look like the Soviet Union taking people and throwing them in gulags. It looks like gang violence. It looks like crime. This is the new way to do it. It's not that they're going to get in trouble saying, oh, well, how dare the regime here throw this person in prison for being outspoken against the government. The media covers it instead as critic of Venezuelan regime murdered in, botched robbery. It's that kind of stuff. The collectivos are part of the regime, but they work as an extra legal function because they're criminals. Every communist regime now does this. And they're now targeting Trump supporters and American supporters in the country. It says, days after the sudden decapitation of the Maduro regime, Venezuelans have been left fearing what could come next as mobs of men dressed in civilian clothes with assault rifles slung over their shoulders roam the streets. And the big question is this: if you believe these are gangs, why are the police not stopping them? If you believe these are just criminals, why does the system not punish them? Why are they allowed to do this? Back to my point. These are regime puppets. These are puppets of the regime. They say this, quote, "The future is uncertain. The collectivos have weapons. The Colombian guerrilla is already here in Venezuela, so we don't know what's going to happen. Time will tell." Oswald, a 69-year-old Venezuelan shop owner, told The Telegraph. It says a state of emergency decree published on Monday is sought to crack down on any public celebration of the U.S. operation. It said it ordered police to immediately begin the national search and capture of everyone involved in the promotion or support of the armed attack by the United States. In other words, a war on public opinion. Do not dare support this. Do not dare post about this. Do not dare celebrate it, or the regime will come after you. And so this really makes an important point for the United States, because if America now does not intervene, if America now does not stop these groups, these gangs, these collectivos, even the regime and its agents, or even the guerrillas coming now in from Colombia, again doing the exact same thing, using gangs and cartels as the thugs of the regime, because that's how they operate. If they don't stop them, it will damage public opinion, and America will look like the bad guy. The clock is on, the timer is ticking now, America needs to act, or it's going to look bad on the United States. We'll see what they do. Another point also, it's possible the situation unfolding in Venezuela could also affect the timeline of deportations of Venezuelans in the United States, by the way. Just the News said this: the Justice Department requested a week-long delay, 1 week, of a court deadline to return deported Venezuelans to the United States after the arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in a U.S. operation. It says the DOJ is facing a Monday deadline from U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, yet in the headlines again, to either facilitate the return of the deported Venezuelan nationals to the U.S. or otherwise provide them with hearings that satisfy the requirements of due process, the Washington Examiner reported. It says they were deported in March 2025 to a mega prison in El Salvador because of their alleged ties to the Tren de Aragua gang before being transferred to Venezuela in a prisoner exchange. It said on Sunday night, the DOJ said in a court filing that the extension is necessary because the military operation over the weekend has led to substantial changes in the country. In other words, Judge Boasberg wants all the alleged Tren de Aragua gang members brought back to the United States. How dare you send terrorists to their own country? Bring them back to America, because terrorists, and the gang the members are, under U.S. designation now, need to have due process under the American system. He wants to extend the protections for Americans to terrorists or suspected terrorists, which in some ways is good for Americans, because if somebody just calls you a terrorist, they can't send you to Cuba, okay? They can't send you to El Salvador. We'll see where this goes. But as it notes, the Justice Department is saying right now that effectively the military operation in Venezuela is causing them to ask for some delays in some processes. It would be difficult if right now as we speak, the Venezuelan regime, the remnants of it, are literally hunting anybody who celebrated the overthrow of Maduro. To take people by the hundreds of thousands and just send them back there right now might not be the nicest thing to do. This could actually delay some of those operations, and we shall see how it goes. All right, that said, everyone, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. Let's see, first of all here. Okay. All right, question one, Foggy01. You're saying since the oil is being stopped to go to China and Russia, it will cripple their countries. It will cripple their countries to go to war. China will not be able to invade Taiwan, and Russia might have to stop their war. It's possible. You know, actually, economic warfare is a powerful thing. Economic warfare is a really powerful thing. Let me explain. Okay, so there's a weird side to war. When most of us think about war, we think about, okay, wartime manufacturing. We think about troops, we think about military capabilities, we don't think about finances. How many of you in the chat can tell me what enables the financing of war? Tell me. What has enabled the financing of war going back to at least the Napoleonic Wars? You tell me. The simple answer for most of this is the financial system, the banks, the loan system, especially with centralized banking, actually. If you talk to people who work in finance, it's very interesting. If you talk to people who work really high up in finance or banking, and you ask them about global conflict, they have a radically different opinion on it and viewpoint on it than almost anybody. I've actually, years ago, I spoke at a banking event for gold, right? I was asked to speak about Chinese subversion and stuff like this, and so I went and, I actually had to debate somebody. It was an interesting discussion. All right, talking about the threats of China, destabilization operations, unconventional warfare, and hearing the way these people talked about money and war was extremely interesting. This is what they say. They say all wars are bank wars. That sounds crazy, right? All wars are bank wars. That is a radically different take on war than what you or I would ever think of. Banks and centralized banks are the enabling factors for war. Banks and centralized banks are the enabling factors for wartime production. Bank loans are what extend wars. Bank loans are what keep wars going. Without the banks, the wars cannot continue. Without the banks, the wars cannot extend themselves. Without the banks, peace would happen much sooner. Now, am I saying, well, the banks are to blame for everything? No, not really, right? It's not like they do it against their will. It's not like the countries are being forced into it. But the bank loan system does work on a kind of debt economy and allows for massive wartime production. Now, you could say on that point, too, this is why post-war countries oftentimes deal with massive debt, because they have to pay back all the money they borrowed to make the wars keep going. And oftentimes the loser of the war is not only held liable for the human cost or the war crimes, or have to lose whatever they had to, have to lose basically everything that they lost, right? They have to surrender resources, they have to surrender some type of government, independence, right? If you lose a war, your country is typically taken over to some extent by another country. They control some elements of your government and media oftentimes. There's a transition put in place, and the policies and the demands of the war have to be met by some type of political change. That is oftentimes the consequence of war. But the other side of war is debt. The other side of the war is who becomes liable for the costs of the war. And this is why oftentimes you see the losers of the war go into what? Hyperinflation. Why do they go into hyperinflation? It's because they become liable for all the debt and costs that the war incurred. And this is why you have people wheeling around entire wheelbarrows of cash to go buy a loaf of bread, because their money goes into hyperinflation and it is worth literally basically nothing. That's what war does to you. Why does it do that? Because of good old centralized banking and fiat currency. That's why. Because they spent beyond their means, and the massive inflation, the massive amount of money printing, the massive amount of loans causes the extreme devaluation of their currency. That's why, or inflation, right? The extreme inflation of their currency. That's why it happens. So, the other reality of a war is that you can actually stop a war through economic warfare by disabling the economic factors that allow the war to continue. And in the current day and age, economic warfare can be a tool of war by other means. You can destroy a system through economic warfare. You can destabilize a government through economic warfare. You can cause mass protests. You can cause people to riot on the streets and overthrow their own government for you through economic warfare. Why is that? What does the economy affect? What does the economy affect? It affects the living standards of the people of a country. What is the main motivator for people going out and protesting? It's when their quality of life reaches a state where the consequences of protesting or even overthrowing a regime are less so than the suffering they are currently under. If you can take, it's a balancing act. Well-being of the individual, consequence of acting on unhappiness with certain policies. When this reaches a level so low that the consequences of action become greater than the consequences of inaction, people go to the streets and riot. That's what you're now watching happening in Iran, by the way. That's what the CCP is terrified of. That is what would overthrow Russia from within if they did not have foreign wartime production and support. Right now, the accusation is that China is basically propping up Russia. Right? They're propping it up. A lot of it is economics. You could argue on the same side that America and Western Europe are propping up Ukraine right now. How much money are we giving to them? Remember also, what is American money going to for Ukraine? Is it just to war? No. What is it going to? We're paying for their political system, right? Do you all remember this? American military support to Ukraine is not only going to buy weapons and bombs and whatever else they need, it is also going to maintain their government. We are actually paying to keep their system running. Why is that? Why is that? It is because economic factors are what keep social stability in place during a war, during a conflict, during something that everyone might not agree with. You actually need to maintain some degree of benefit to the people before they say, well, you know what, maybe ending this war and giving them part of our country is the better decision. You cannot sink public well-being below the threshold of what is being offered on the other side or the consequences of it. It's a very delicate balancing act. And so, as Foggy01 notes, and fully agree with you, Foggy01, you're noting that these economic impacts, the cutting off of the oil trade, the strangling of the economic factors and system that Venezuela represented, it actually could cause some of these countries to lose their ability to do some of this. I'll go into it more tomorrow, but one of the conditions being put on the table now for the new Venezuelan leadership during the new transition of power is that they have to also push out China, Russia, and Iran. They have to basically boot them out and all the economic elements they built in Venezuela. So 100%, that's what's on the table right now. If you get rid of the supporting factors of a system, the system will collapse. Every system is propped up by pillars. You don't have to fight the surface system, but if you fight the pillars and pull out the pillars, the system will collapse. Economy is one of the big ones. Economy and social stability, those are big ones, real big ones. Raf, you're saying, Josh, it's purposeful chaos, in my opinion. Aimed at destabilizing the commie world as it exists today. Destabilization measures work like smokescreens, allowing you to move and control the terrain. Agreed as well, actually. Chaos is also a weapon. Chaos and chaos operations are, you could call it demoralization / destabilization. Chaos operations are actually very effective. And they're easily done. They're really easily done. Any kind of color revolution, as they would call it, works on the grounds of chaos operations. What do? You effectively manufacture narratives that challenge the legitimacy of a system or of policies. You try to eliminate the threads that tie together a civilization. What are the threads of a civilization? Well, one is mythos, narrative. What is the historical narrative that supports the idea of what a country represents? Tear that down. Slice the threads. For America, it's the narrative of the Founding Fathers, the virtue of the Constitution, the American idea espoused in the Declaration of Independence. These are the threads of our nation. Anti-constitutional forces, forces that demonize the legacy of the American Founding Fathers, systems that try to challenge this, are scissors trying to sever those threads, right? Because without a unifying idea, you don't really have a nation. A nation is supported by, what they call the social contract. The social contract is supported by the idea that a system represents. You need to have a system to unify the tribes. Every country is a unification of tribes. Every country is multiple tribes brought together by a larger unifying idea. How many countries have redrawn their borders throughout all of human history? How many countries used to have many tribes that represented the baseline of their civilization? Germany, Britain, the entire Celtic world, France, right? China is dozens and dozens and dozens of ethnic groups. I forgot the name of the group. They have a prevailing cultural group that is basically the dominating one right now. But China is actually a large group of tribes. Historically, there used to be many different countries. Russia was many tribes as well. And of course, even in the time since America was tribes, right? But also even religious factions. The various Protestant factions that now have been unified in the American system were very different religions that did not get along. You could even argue that states and state identity used to be tribes, as they were in the time of the Founding Fathers. Unifying the states under a common idea of federalization was complicated. Every country is a unification of tribes. And so if you can also damage the intertribal narratives, cause divisions among the tribes, make these people start to view differences among each other, racial conflicts, religious conflicts, ideological conflicts, unifying ideas between different political ideologies, if you sever the elements that have allowed for relative peace between them, not the elimination of differences or whatever else, but the relative peace that we agree to, because we can at least view that there's something that makes us have commonality. We can still find common ground with each other. Sever those and you sever the tribes. Sever those and you dissolve a nation. You turn a unifying body into many different particles. You dissolve it. That is what a chaos operation does, a color revolution. It's also what communism aims to do, by the way. Mao Zedong explained this theory as 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4. In other words, taking a single unifying whole, and he actually used 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4 to explain dialectical materialism. Identify, contradict, eliminate the middle. You identify an issue, a tribal conflict, or tribal identity. You divide it, right? 2 conflicting narratives, and you say there's no middle. You dissolve it. 1 becomes 2. Then you take these and you sever them. 2 becomes 4. And so dialectical materialism, which is the main communist tactic, works as a type of chaos operation to use conflicting narrative to drive wedges between people. You want to drive wedges to dissolve the system. It's a very active tactic. Very active tactic. If I were to actually explain what communism is, it's merely that. Communism is a tool to dissolve societies. It is a tool to negate a society. It is a tool to create narratives of conflict and division with the intent of negating the state, because they believe that the negation of the state will lead to the idea of what they call the negation of the negation. The destruction of the existing institution. They want to tear things down and then reconstitute it in the image of the communist ideology. They believe everything has to be destroyed. And so that's what they're trying to do. And yes, to that point, chaos operations are very effective. It's not only communist regimes that do it. Western Machiavellianism does the same thing, for example. Western, intrigue, if you go back to like medieval Europe, did basically the same thing. And information operations, narrative warfare, economic warfare, the subversion of the banking systems, using banks to cause problems, which was a big problem in the United States with like even the British banks during the time of the Founding Fathers. All of these are tools for this. This is war in a degree that most people never think of, because it's not how we normally think of war. But if you were to ask me, and you were to ask a lot of people familiar with these things, we would say, and I would say, this is the true face of war. This is the real face of war that you do not see, that most of you are not even allowed to see, frankly. This is what war actually looks like. The surface conflicts and the fighting and the troops, that is the smokescreen. The real war is this kind of stuff. California gal, you're saying the RNC has abandoned California. It's basically true. You're saying, so all our efforts politically have to pretty much be grassroots efforts by Californians for Californians. Targeting investigations on fraud in California could potentially go a long way in helping us. Yeah, actually, it's true. It's the same thing in New York. All right, folks, let me give you an example. Who was the Republican nominee in the New York City governor race? Who was the RNC candidate in New York City for governor? Right? Everyone's complaining about Mamdani now. What was the Republican solution to that? All right, who was it? The answer is nobody. The one who was endorsed was Cuomo, because Trump nominated Cuomo. Cuomo was not a Republican, he was a Democrat. He ran as an independent because Mamdani won the Democrat nominee. The closest thing he had to a Republican was Curtis Sliwa, but he did not have the RNC backing, right? Republicans didn't even have a candidate. Republicans didn't have anybody, really. Trump was endorsing a Democrat to win against a Democratic socialist. It was Democrats against socialists. It wasn't Republicans against Democrats. Same thing with a lot of California. If you look at a lot of races, you don't even have Republican candidates. And then they wonder, oh, how is it that, our country or state is so far left? Because it's not Republicans versus Democrats, it's Democrats versus socialists in a lot of cases. And I'll make a point again. I've actually said before, because I remember I was a bit disenfranchised for a bit, saying, oh, well, how did politics get so crazy? Oh, man, I wish somebody would come and rescue us. I wish there was a grand leader from the heavens who would come and fix all of our problems. That's not what we are as a country. America is not that. America is not a system where we want some king or dictator to come and rescue us from our hardships. I'd say actually that's a grand, I think, subversion you have to watch out for. What is the solution in America? The solution in America is personal ownership. If you don't like something, do something about it. Actually, I would say the basis of a free system, the basis of a democracy or a republic as we are, the basis of it is engagement in the political system by the average citizen. The stability and the maintenance of a free society requires engagement of the average citizen. When the average citizen stops engaging, when the average citizen stops voting, when the average citizen says, I'm not going to run for city council, I'm not going to run for the school board, I'm not going to run for this or that, what happens? Somebody else takes it over. And the people taking it over are not your average citizen. They're institutions. They're political machines. They're operations. They're parties. When the average citizen disengages from the political system, you no longer have a true republic. You no longer have a true, of the people, by the people, for the people, American ideal. You now have something else. You have a late stage republic, which very quickly oftentimes first goes into pure democracy and then goes into tyranny. The Founding Fathers warned about this. If you believe there's something wrong with your state, if you believe there's something wrong with your local political system, right? What is the solution? The solution is you are a citizen of this country, and it is through civic engagement that our system is maintained. You need to engage politically. I'm not saying go out and protest and act like a crazy person. I'm saying just engage in the political system, because that is the basis of our political system. That is actually the basis of our political system, really, civic engagement. And so it is unfortunate. New York has this problem. California has this problem. A lot of states have this problem. And on the point of California, gal, I'm not saying you're not engaged. I know you are, right? You're saying that targeting investigations on fraud in California could potentially go a long way in helping us. It is true, actually, because one of the greatest factors also in a free system is information. Information is what makes people become civically engaged, actually. Information is what causes people to support or not support something. And information and exposure tend to be the things that rile people up. It is information that sparks protests. It is information that makes people say, you know what, maybe I'll do something about this. Maybe I'll run for my school board. Wow, I found out they're doing this. Someone should do something. Nobody's doing anything. Well, I guess I need to do it. Right? That is the basis of it all. And so by having some good exposure and good information come out, it is possible a lot more people could become civically engaged based on what they see. And I think that would be a healthy thing for California. We'll find out. SD731, you're saying, the dissolution of unifying ideas is exactly what commie-crats are trying to do. Yeah, and it's true, actually. I would actually say that communism and the battle between freedom and socialism is always a narrative battle. It's actually why, if you understand wars, let me explain something, okay? In the Vietnam War, what was America doing when we were fighting Vietnam? Well, our generals and our leaders, they were counting bodies, literally. They would get the dead after a battle, and they would count them. Well, they killed 10 of us and we killed 100 of them. Obviously, we're winning. Go Team America. It was true. Our guys ripped them apart. Our guys fought like heroes. Really. The Vietnam veterans did not have an easy time. And the amount of battles they won, I mean, a lot of it, like real close quarters, crazy stuff, right? That was a rough battle. We were counting bodies, right? What were the Vietnamese doing? They were saying they fought 2 wars. What did they say? There was the war of bullets, the one where we were counting bodies on, and there was the war of words, the information war. The war of words was not being fought on the grounds in Vietnam. The war of words was not being fought in the jungles. The war of words was not coming into account when the bodies were being counted. The war of words was an interpretation of that and a restructuring of the narrative that American action was no longer, that the fact that we were winning the war of bullets was not victory. It was a war crime. It was criminal. It was bad. That was the narrative war. And the war of words, what did it do? It sparked protests on American streets. The war of words was being spread by Soviet active measures. The war of words was being spread by communist-trained Maoist factions operating in the United States like Black Panthers and a lot of the student movements and journalists who were selling out to the system, going to Russia, touring around, coming back, and writing articles praising communism and demonizing the American system. That was the war of words. And the war of words was causing mass protest. And what does mass protest do? Protest represents the support of the people, and the voice of the people is what gets government action to happen. And so you had local politicians responding to it, saying, I will represent you. I will call for what you want. I will get elected because this is what you want, and we will stand for it. And they went and, based on the war of words, changed the rules of engagement, based on the war of words, demonized the American system, based on the war of words, made us lose a war. And so the Vietnamese said they fought 2 wars, the war of bullets and the war of words. And they say because they lost the war of bullets but won the war of words, they won the war. What does that tell you? The narrative warfare is more consequential than the physical warfare. Basically, the narrative warfare and the battle of ideas is more consequential than open combat. That a small nation, not nearly as capable as the United States, can win a war against the United States using information, using the narrative war. Narrative warfare is the face of modern war. It really is. And a lot of countries actively do it. I'll note just two things and I'll move on. The Chinese Communist Party adopted in its military code has an information warfare system. It's called the three warfares: psychological warfare, media warfare, and legal warfare. Psychological warfare not being about disinformation per se, it's about the narrative, the interpretation of what is happening. So a true incident, something did happen, you're not trying to say it did not happen, you're changing how it is perceived. The war of public opinion, the war of rewriting history, the war of reframing things to alter the narrative from something against you to something for you. Think the redefinition of the American founding fathers. Think the demonization of our founding stories. Think the narrative of, well, China's not taking over the South China Sea. They're merely enforcing maritime action for stability against evil American imperialism. Taiwan, they're not going to invade Taiwan. They're merely taking back what was historically theirs. Russia is not invading Ukraine. This is historical ownership, and it is the wrongs of the West that did this. It's narrative. I'm not saying one side. I'm just saying this is narrative warfare, right? It's the framing of a narrative to legitimize or delegitimize something. They're not arguing over whether they're invading. They're not arguing over whether they want to conquer something. They're arguing over the interpretation of the action. Do you support it or not support it? That's psychological warfare. Media warfare is the control of systems of information, and legal warfare is the use of international courts and criminal systems to file lawsuits as a form of legal warfare. Much more effective. And that's also to silence dissent. You can destroy journalists. You can sue government officials. You can maintain an information hegemony using legal attacks, libel, sanctions, lawsuits. You can use this to destroy dissent and voices of dissent. That is the tool used to do it, to maintain narrative dominance. This is, again, going into the true face of modern war. Lucius, you're saying, unlimited mass illegal immigration equals chaos operation. It is also. It's a destabilization operation. And why is that? It's because it does a couple things. Okay, so there is what's called weaponized migration. You can find reports on it. This is a thing. The Syrian leader, I believe was it Assad who did this? I think it was Assad, even openly stated he was doing that to Western Europe. He was using mass migration and migrant flows as a tool to destabilize Western Europe. Mass migration does a few things. What does it do? I talked about the unifying elements of a society, typically things that unify the tribes in financial well-being, right? Your ability to afford a house, your ability to afford groceries, your ability to have a decent school, your sense of safety, your belief that the system of government represents you and your interests. How do you destabilize that? Well, supply and demand, you gerrymander the systems of a free market. Supply and demand is the basis of a free market. So if you increase demand but squeeze supply, you will thereby increase the cost of goods. How do you do that? You flood it with people. You make it so that the demand for everything is increased. You squeeze the creation of new product by doing other things. Maybe you spur an economic lockdown. Who did that? Maybe you do things to squeeze through regulation the production of new homes, maybe. Many local officials, Canada does that to a horrible degree. You then increase competition for it. You bring in more people, right? You bring in more people. And if you have one person, one home, two people, one home, the difference in price goes up quite a bit. Hey, more people want this. I'm going to raise the price and see what they're willing to pay. If you make competition where it's 50 people trying to buy a home, the competition for it, you can keep raising the price based on what people want to pay. That's a manipulation of the capitalist system. Not true capitalism. This is crony capitalism. This is what you call state interventionism or a mixed model economy. State interventionism to put artificial strains on the capitalist system to mess with it, to make it not a true free market system, free market capitalism. You're messing with it by intervening. And so you can do that. What happens then is the well-being of the average person becomes destabilized. They become unhappy. They might go protest. The other thing you have is cohesion of the tribes, tribal cohesion. Every country has people of different opinions. Every country has people of different ethnic backgrounds to an extent. Even at the tribal level, Germany was many different tribes. You had the Visigoths and the Vandals and so on, right? Britain was like that. America was like that. Even state identity and so on, right? The Bostonians and the New Yorkers were very different people in the time of the Founding Fathers. You do something to unify them. What do you do then? You break the unification. And so when you can make it so that there's no longer a unifying culture, there's no longer a unifying idea, there's no longer a unifying support for the founding stories of a country. You bring in people who hate it. You bring in people who've been taught that it's bad, it's evil, and that they're even justified in invading your country because you owe them for some kind of historical wrongdoing. They're fed with these narratives and they're sent in, right? They want to change they demonize your legal system. They want to replace it with their own, like Sharia law, for example, in Europe. They come in here basically not supporting the culture, the values, the ideas, the religion, whatever else of your country. And what do? They make the people of the country stop seeing commonality with the others of their country. You eliminate the systems of social cohesion. And by doing that, you do destabilize the state. Absolutely. Mass migration is a tool as well. Mass migration is a tool, as Lucius notes, and as I note as well, as part of a chaos operation. You could also call it a destabilization operation. You destroy the unifying culture, you destroy the unifying ideas, you destroy the idea of representation, and you create suffering. You create distrust. You create social divides. And on the other side too, every single culture has certain unifying ideas of mannerisms. And this is another thing entirely. Okay, what is the unifying factor of culture and religion? Tell me. What does religion and culture do to unify people? Well, it creates standards of interaction. The interpretation of standards of interaction form what we view as nice or not nice behavior, of what is allowed or not allowed behavior, of what is considered polite or impolite. Every culture has different concepts of polite and impolite. I did a lot of work in South Korea. If you go to South Korea, it's polite to slurp your soup. You come to America, they'll think you're a slob. They'll think you're disgusting. What is polite here is impolite there. What is polite there is impolite here. In some cultures, you bow. Some cultures, you don't bow properly, they're going to be offended. Some cultures, if you're expected to remove your shoes before going into a house. Americans tend to keep their shoes on. My culture, we still remove our shoes. Not everybody does it. But if you go into someone's house and you don't remove your shoes, you're going to offend them. You will offend them deeply in some cultures. In some cultures, if you touch the top of their heads, a lot of Asian cultures in particular, I don't know if they all believe this, but I know in some cultures they believe the soul resides at the top of the head. It's worse than flipping someone off. They will fight you if you touch their head. It's extremely, extremely offensive. And so, if you bring people into a culture who are deemed offensive to that culture, it will also damage social cohesion. If you bring people into a culture whose standards of what is offensive versus non-offensive are different, people will start to hate each other. Okay, a good one for New York, loud music. Latinos love loud music. They blast it full blast all the time. That's not considered offensive to them. It's normal for them. For a lot of Americans, it's extremely offensive. And so, that is one element that causes a lot of problems, right? Just one of many examples. You find this in every single culture. You have things like this. And so if you bring in people whose cultural standards are way more offensive. Differences in marriage rights, differences in age of consent, differences in even, the way that women should be treated. You will cause a lot of social friction. You will make people start to hate each other. And that is one way to destroy a country. It is a way to destroy a country, because you destroy the culture that represents the bedrock of the country. All right, everyone, that said, thank you so much for being here. Before you go, I have a new special feature out. Don't forget to watch it. This is the Venezuela operation, why the Maduro raid is only the beginning. You can watch this right now on Epic TV, epochtv.com. This is a very important special feature. I present you with information that I don't think anybody else is talking about. I show you historical context. I show you what this actually means. And I show you, now that the first domino has fallen, where the next dominoes are, what this will lead to. This is a very important special feature. I hope you get to watch it. If you're on Epic TV, you can watch it for free. If you're on YouTube, please go watch it and spread it as well. Tell a friend or family member about it. Post it. Help us get the word out. I present information nobody is talking about, but I would argue the information I show is the real story of what is right now happening. It's very important to know this. So check it out. Again, the Venezuela operation, why the Maduro raid is only the beginning, on epochtv.com. Link in the description. That's it, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.